Can we please acknowledge the elephant in the room? Loading time. Saber, you can do better. WWZ fast, Evil Dead fast, Mudrunner fast, Sandstorm, Immaculate Hit Detection. Oh, WTF here. Okay, well, this is interesting. I feel like I've seen posts like this come up, so I definitely wanted to cover this. Now, as far as loading screens on my end, I felt like they sometimes can be inconsistent, but they have been, running pretty smoothly, ultimately. But yeah, you can notice sometimes loading screens can definitely take a little bit longer in certain scenarios. Mainly for me, some of the longest loading screens you would think are some of the simpler ones, like the ones where if you're loading into someone else's battle barge or whatever. For whatever reason, sometimes those loading screens take a while. But then when it comes to actually jumping into the operation, the loading screens for me, most of the time, feels pretty fine. But still, it definitely varies. So I definitely wanted to revisit this conversation as far as loading times. We've talked about loading times and loading screens a couple months ago. It wasn't, it wasn't too recent where we saw a handful of people complain about this. So it's always nice to revisit this just to see if, anything changed or, just to touch base on your guys' experience with this. Ultimately, I would love to see a comment or two from you guys, just mentioning your experience with loading times at the moment. Are they better? Have they been better since patch 7? For me, they have been, honestly, as far as performance on PC, it does feel better. But yeah, sometimes the loading times can feel a little inconsistent. And not to mention, sometimes you can just get loading screens because somebody leaves the lobby a little bit earlier than you kind of wanted to see that, but I don't know. That can definitely feel a little bit janky. So yeah, I guess it would be nice to see, the devs kind of iron out some of the loading screens and the loading times that we have right now. That would be nice. Not too sure how they can, go about implementing some improvements for the loading times, but I hope they could. So yes, definitely let me know in the comments your guys' loading times, loading screen situation. Do you feel like it's too long? I honestly know off the top of my head, I heard Xbox has some pretty wild loading times. I will say sometimes it does feel better on the PS5 Pro. The PS5 Pro for my loading times sometimes can beat out my PC. It really depends. It can be weird. Sometimes you can connect to a host who has weird connection, and that can definitely make your loading times feel a little bit inconsistent. So yeah, this is why it's important to kind of talk about these subjects, even though for the most part, it's not the most important thing. I know, I've seen a few posts like this recently, so I definitely wanted to, discuss this for today. The load times are the number one issue for me. I can overlook everything if there was a near seamless transition from process to process, but the load times coupled with the matchmaking honestly makes it incomprehensible to play for me. All right. I definitely can understand where the load times can be an issue. Number one issue is kind of interesting. Matchmaking has been great for me recently. I know sometimes it can be annoying jumping into a game where the person's at the battle barge, but the devs can't do anything about that if the guy is AFK but still just put up his matchmaking. When I jump into games now, I am not seeing, the class I want to play picked at all, which is very good for me. So I just can't really understand the matchmaking unless it's something connection-wise on, either the player's end or the host's end, something like that, you know what I mean? I don't know. Matchmaking for me feels very fine. But the loading times, yeah, I understand what they mean with the loading times. There's definitely a lot of loading screens in this game because even after an operation, if you want to leave the battle barge, you get a loading screen if you're not the host. If you are the host, you don't. So maybe some of this can, some of these issues you can circumvent by maybe just hosting your own games, something like that. But still, matchmaking for me has been fine. I haven't really seen any real criticisms, or not really any criticisms, but any real complaints about matchmaking. And a lot of times it's kind of I don't know. They've done so much with matchmaking. They did a couple of hot fixes recently that did fix the connection errors that were terrible. I don't know. Matchmaking is what it is right now. We were dealing with heavy matchmaking issues a couple weeks ago. I'm not seeing anything that aggressive on my end, and I've seen more people complain about loading times more so than matchmaking recently, so I'm not too sure how to approach this. Ultimately, I think, I'm not jumping into any other games where my class is picked. I think that's a really good spot for matchmaking. I know this is just on my end and survivorship bias or whatever, but ultimately, ultimately I'd still play the game as much as most players here, so I would run into these issues if, it was something that everyone was dealing with. But still, I understand how it's different for everyone. So, matchmaking issues aside, loading times is definitely something that we are going to focus on for today's video. And then hopefully we get a good amount of people who are also interested in seeing a loading times fix. And maybe something pops up on the forums about it. And then maybe the devs see it. Who knows? Ultimately, we are here to discuss the issues with loading times and matchmaking. If it was in a bad situation as far as connection or whatever, I can see where matchmaking can make that issue a little bit worse. I definitely understand that point. Loading times could be better. It's tolerable. Deciding not to play a fantastic game due to loading times is baffling. All right, well, I think this is an interesting point to make. Now, I agree. Yes, Space Marine 2 right now is in a really good spot. As far as, what we looked at or how the game looked at in the past, like as far as, issues or matchmaking, I think the game has improved 100%. Now, I can think of one game that had some pretty big loading times or loading screens issue is Starfield. And now, I will admit, Starfield is not a very good game, even if they fix the loading screens on that. But I can definitely understand where a certain number of loading times and loading screens, a certain amount of loading screens is definitely going to start making people a little bit mad for sure. That game is definitely an egregious example because there's loading screens everywhere. So even if you had good loading times, it doesn't even matter. I don't think we have as big of an issue with the loading time debacle in Space Marine 2 as the case with Starfield. But still, I can definitely say yes that a certain amount of loading issues can definitely make a fantastic game feel a lot worse. Whereas in Starfield's case, it made a pretty mid-game feel terrible. So something like that. I don't really mean to throw strays at any other games or anything, but that is kind of the point that came to mind from this comment. But no, he's ultimately right here. I don't think the loading times are enough to really push me into the direction to say that the game isn't in a good spot right now, because I just don't think that's true. Remember, not everyone has long load times. I would always expect newer games to have longer load times, depending on how new your setup is. I will admit, I did have to kind of upgrade my PC a little bit for this game, for sure. I can be in a game within a minute and a half bearing connectivity issues, but I got a new setup just before launch so I could get the most out of this game. I know not everyone can do this. I saved for this. Yep, you definitely should save for PC upgrades and stuff. Older systems will take longer. I'm aware that some people, namely consoles, take much longer to get in. It's just the nature of games, always has been. Okay, so the example this guy used here, where was the time here? He said, what was it, a minute and a half? That feels fast. that feels fast for me, to be completely honest. I have a pretty good laptop. Honestly, though, I'm not too sure if a laptop will ever have as good as loading times as a desktop, but I'm not the most tech-savvy person in the world, so. I will admit, though, off the top of my head, a minute and a half sounds very fast. I'm not too sure. Yeah, within a minute and a half. So it can even be shorter than a minute and a half. That's pretty wild. I think on average it's about 2 minutes. So I mean, he's right though. He is right about the loading screens not being the same for everyone. 100% true. And this game is a newer game, and I do admit they definitely built this game as far as graphics and effects and everything. It's very intensive. So yeah, I'm really not surprised that this game put some systems into a position where you would want to, upgrade. That said, though, the PC, my first PC that I have purchased myself, yeah, I got it around, the pandemic and all that. So that PC can still run Space Marine 2 fine. However, it's been a couple patches that we've had some, maintenance on, performance and everything like that. So ultimately, it did take a while for the game to actually feel like it kind of could run properly on a system that is potentially 3 to 4 years old, something like that. So I feel like that's a pretty good window to kind of gauge, where you want to upgrade stuff. I did pick up a laptop recently because it's just, I'm just, being safe where, hey, if my main system goes down, at least I have a backup ready to go. And not to mention it's also stronger than my main PC, so I'm definitely excited about it. It did take a little bit to learn how to use and everything. So for the most part, I'm still, using my main setup. And then, yeah, I still have a backup. And then not to mention, the PS5 Pro I still use. And the loading times for that system also, I will say the PS5 Pro can feel really fast. But still, depending on the connections, it can also get hit with loading times that feel very, very slow. So I think, honestly, not only does it, not only do load times kind of, it's a little bit different for everybody. Ultimately, even on your system, your loading times aren't always going to be the same because you're going to connect to hosts where you have worse connection or something like that. So this is why it's important. Tech issues is one of the most important issues to really get a discussion on, because then you actually have more examples, and then you can cross-reference everybody's complaints and then understand what's actually affecting most players. It's one thing to say, hey, load times are bad, but it's another thing to say load times are bad on Xbox and I'm using this type of connection, yada yada yada. So details go far away. I really hope the connection issues, not connection issues, the loading times, I really hope loading times aren't an issue for most of you guys out there. I do run into players who have very fast loading times, and you can see this because at the end of the operations, they just leave as soon as you hit the stats screen, and then it's like, holy cow, what? That host had a really fast loading time. So minute and a half seems pretty fast, but kind of an interesting example here for sure. Yeah, let me know in the comments your personal experience with loading times recently. My personal experience with loading times has been inconsistent, but it has been better. Even performance overall has been better. And I will admit, on console, it can definitely feel more inconsistent than on PC. Something like that. But yeah, like I said, I have 2 different PC systems I play on, and one of those systems are like 4 years old. And yeah, sometimes it can feel a little bit long. I don't really have another game to compare it to be completely honest. Given the nature of this game, how it feels a little, it definitely has an old school feel. I'm not surprised that loading times is a point of contention when it comes to, performance overall and what can be improved and such. I mean, that's why, you see a lot of games try their best to take loading times out of the equation. When you actually queue up the game, there's a lot of load in the background menu stuff and whatever. But still, yeah. Let me know in the comments let me know in the comments if you have anything to add about loading times, because I did admit in this video I'm not the most tech savvy, so there's definitely some information here that's probably not 100% factual, and that's why the comments are very important. Truly. But yes, thanks for watching. Let me know your experience with loading times. Happy Mother's Day.